Live from Swansea, this is the Twilight Show with Nathan Gynn on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Tonight, it's a show looking back. It's a show thinking about some of the things. Often we talk about how the children, maybe that there is this ongoing hangover from the pandemic times. Sometimes we still think about it. I wanted to ask this question. I wanted to know what was happening for teachers, what that experience was. I wanted to take this opportunity to look back, start of the year. I was hoping that we would be able to pause for a moment, find out. We're going to talk to some teachers. We're going to be joined by Joanne and by Mike, who trained during that period, and maybe reflect a little bit on their journeys, some of the conversations. We put out a Twitter poll, and that Twitter poll came back, and it suggested that there was still a hangover maybe of what had been a disrupted start to some people's teaching careers. So we're joined. I can see we already have Joanne in the studio joining us now, though. I'm just going to check that she can hear me. Joanne, are you there?
Hiya, yeah, I'm here.
Hi. Well, welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. It's good to have you here. You know, in the introduction there, I was talking a little bit about this disruption and things that happen during training. And as I said, I know we're going to be joined by Mike, Mr. Kemp, and hopefully he'll call in and join us as well and talk. I wanted to start off talking a little bit. If you're there, Michael, just hit that call in button and we'll connect you. But Joanne, while I've got you here, why don't we start by talking just a little bit about where you currently are in your career, and then we'll track back a little bit before that. So Joanne, tell us a little bit about what you currently do.
Okay, so what I currently do, I'm in my third year of teaching. I am an ECT2 now. I am a religious studies teacher at a lovely little school in Hastings. And a mental health first aider as well at that school, as well as the union rep at that school as well. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. And this year I've started teaching Key Stage 3 as well as 4 and 5. Is that what you wanted to know?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That's a great start to us. And I can see Michael has joined us as well. Michael, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. So, Michael, which do you prefer, by the way?
Go with Mike.
Mike, fantastic. Now, if you're able to just tell us kind of a little bit about what you currently do, and as I said, before we track back to kind of find out what that experience really was.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a predominantly French teacher. This year I've started to teach a little bit of Spanish as well, which is out of my comfort zone, but needs must. I finished my ECT2 last year, and this year I've started being 2IC for languages, which is very exciting for me. And it's in an academy in Southeast London.
Fantastic. Now, as I say, that kind of gives us an idea for where you guys are at now. But I wanted to track back. And as I say, this show is going to be talking a little bit about, I guess, some of the questions we need to ask ourselves as a profession is, did we do enough to support you? What was that journey like? Is it still having an impact? Is there still support that needs to be in place? All of those things. But Joanne, can you tell us a little bit, thinking back then to your training, how was it affected and disrupted by the pandemic?
It feels like a lifetime ago, but also not that long ago at all. It was impacted by the pandemic, I guess, because I signed up to do Teach First, which, if you don't know, is a trial by fire. It is a sink or swim teaching program where you go in with a month's training, not in a school, and you are thrown in the deep end with a 70% timetable, and you learn to teach as you're teaching. Normally, pre-pandemic, you would do a residential time of study at university. So mine would have been Canterbury, and we would have studied with other teachers at the uni. However, because we were going in and out of lockdowns, I did my training online, away from everyone. And as you may or may not be able to tell by my very subtle accent, I'm not from England. I moved here for the job. And I guess it impacted me because I was moving to a new country to do a new job, brand new profession, and I met nobody. And it was very difficult actually to do things like, I don't know, a mock sort of do now exercise, which you normally do in person with other adults. You would have to do over Zoom on a camera with a couple of people in a Zoom room. And so it was even more being thrown into the deep end when we started in September. Lockdowns ended again, and we were in front of real people, which I had never met before, including my colleagues. So it was a hair raising experience starting teaching. Anyway, I don't think I'll ever do anything more stressful in my life, but very worth it, I'd say. So that's the main point of disruption. I was also very disrupted because I didn't we didn't have the same access to tutors, people coming into a room to observe. They couldn't do that, especially if we were in bubbles, which we did with some of our year groups where they were separated from other year groups, and certain people in certain buildings that make up my school weren't able to go into the lower building where I was based to observe me, meaning my feedback was again all online. So that also affected my training as well, as I had to get savvy with lots of different technologies and platforms to try and scramble together my training while the people that were meant to be training me was also trying to figure it out. So we were both there in this situation where neither of us had been in before, trying to figure out, God, what do we do in this sink or swim situation?
Oh, the additional pressures, and it's not something that I'd necessarily thought about for some new teachers. When you say sort of the social aspect of maybe moving to a new area, maybe moving to a place that you're unfamiliar with, as well as the pressures of teaching and learning to teach. That is such an incredible kind of extra benefit. Well, kudos to you for getting through it and everything. And I wonder, was there any specific extra support for you during that? Was there awareness maybe from the training provider or from the schools that you work with that you were also away from home in a sense?
There was an awareness of it, but there wasn't an awful lot people could do, I suppose, in the training end of things. I was very lucky that the school that I was placed in with Teach First, because it was a high need school, it is a very deprived area that I was placed in, which had a lot of need for teachers. There were also a lot of young people who'd moved to the area to help teach in this school. So there were a lot of new faces, a lot of people wanting to socialise. So I think the weird social dynamic that we were in as young teachers, all starting at the same time in this new school that really needed us, having moved away from an area, having not seen people because of lockdowns, we kind of all gelled together very quickly. And I formed some really strong friendships actually as a result with the other trainees at my school, because of the pandemic. But yeah, the training providers themselves, there wasn't a lot that they could really do to support. I mean, they offered some counselling if it was needed, but it never really was. It was just something that I got on with, and luckily I loved teaching, so that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And one of the questions I ask a little bit later on of both of you really is, some of the research, and I've pulled together some of it just for us to, talk through and get your opinions on as people who lived it. It's easy for me to, as a leader maybe to pick up a report and it to give me, advice on what to do to support, but to hear it kind of from the horse's mouth, I think is really important for people, especially our listeners sort of listening in and thinking about early career teachers, and really you're not so much anymore. You're taking on leadership roles. You're moving up through your career. You might forget kind of how it all started. So I find that incredibly interesting, and particularly you touched on there a little bit about how would I word this? This kind of trial by fire, almost. It made you stronger, and some of the research does sort of suggest that there were some positives to come out of it, and we'll get on to maybe talking about the positives and the negatives a little bit later. But I wanted to move on to Michael. If sort of the same question, then I guess is, what was your experience? What did it feel like? How did it affect you at that point? What was the impact of COVID on your training?
Yeah, so I took a different route. I used this. I went by the SCIT route in, so school-centered initial teacher training, which meant that the beginning of my training was university-based and sort of gradually transitioned into more time in school. So sort of an in-between, really, between the Teach First and university-based PGCE. And I think what I guess showed maybe that we trained in a different year and we had different points in the pandemic there. The thing that I found was really the opposite, that I really struggled to make connections with the other people I was training with. And we had a really large cohort of language teachers training together. And I think we had 1, 2 sessions together, and then we were told we can't meet anymore because we're going into schools. We weren't allowed to meet in the university. I'm really lost out on that time together, and sort of talking with people going through the same thing. So I didn't really build those relationships. But yeah, that's one of the main things I remember. But I think then going into work, one of my really vivid memories is my first mentor meeting as an ECT year one. I was very lucky to have an incredible mentor, and we sat down and talked, and I basically said that I've never circulated in a room before, and theoretically I get what circulating is, but my my initial teaching experience in a classroom is having a little black and yellow taped off area that I have to stand in, and I'm not allowed to come out of this. And deputy head coming around with a 2 meter rod to make sure that all the desks are far enough apart, and not being able to circulate is just a huge thing in terms of behaviour management, in terms of assessment and formative assessment. So yeah, I feel like we've probably lost out on some of the what people would consider basics. And going into my first week on my own, I didn't really know how to circulate.
No, I want to ask Michael. I'll ask it to you first, and then I didn't think to ask this of Joanne, but your experience before going into teacher training, had you been a teaching assistant, or was it purely just sort of longer before your time in school yourself, of that experience of what teaching was?
I mean, I grew up in a teaching household, so as I'm sure many teachers do. Dad's well, he's actually a head teacher of an SEMH school, so I think that's probably somewhat similar to what you do. Mum was a teacher, fell out of love with teaching, moved out of teaching, and has worked with the council for a while. So my background is mostly from my family, and spent a lot of time talking to my dad, learning from him about that. But I was working in insurance before that, so I came in from working from home during a pandemic and being sat on my own, just me and my wife in the house for days on end, going into a school. I don't know. I've actually felt that it was great to go.
Yeah, I mean, it must be such, I can't even, because for me, it was a return to normal. For you guys, I guess it was a return, something entirely fresh. And so, Joanne, I want to ask of you, when we did kind of get that right, things are, when bubbles had gone, I guess, when we did get back into the classroom, did it feel like a return to something, or did it feel like a fresh new challenge?
For me, it was a fresh new challenge. I have to say, I went straight from university to Teach First. I finished my master's in theology, and I thought that I had wanted to teach for a while. I guess the only time I'd been in schools was I used to work as an interfaith worker in Edinburgh, and so I would go into schools to do some talks on Islamophobia. That's the closest that I got to teaching, but at no stage did I have to circulate a room, mark books, take questions. Deal with safeguarding. So it was all brand new to me. And yeah, it was a crazy shift as well. I tell you what, though, it's been really good because I would never have had the push to get good with technology until the pandemic, because so much just suddenly was, and my degree wasn't very tech based. And so I was thrown into teaching and thrown into tech at the same time, or at least thrown into being able to be fairly proficient with technology.
Yeah, as I say, we'll go through some of the advice that we should be thinking about for people like yourselves, a little bit later on. But one of the things they come out there, when we get on to talking about pros and cons is, one of the pros maybe was, we have a generation of teachers who are coming through who trained in a highly, in teams, having teams meetings, having online learning, all of these things were positive through. And one of the things that was a negative, though, and Michael's kind of mentioned this already about that kind of circulating around the room, was things about emotional well-being, particularly pastoral, I would call that work, and the learning environment as well. And I wonder, during your training, Michael, was there anything that you noticed that you were learning, maybe through your course, or maybe through the very start of your ECT years, where you were having to learn something purely theoretical that maybe you felt, or possibly people would feel, is better done in person? Like you say, someone could talk me through on a Zoom call how to circulate the room, but it's not quite the same as doing it. Did it feel like something forced?
I think the thing that really I think of is mini whiteboards, which are an incredible tool, but we talked about them theoretically, and then we were told, I'd love to hand out some whiteboards and pens to everyone, but I can't. And how do you explain how to use mini whiteboards and model using mini whiteboards without mini whiteboards? So that's a slightly bizarre situation. I don't know if that kind of is that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's those kind of things, and it's things that I hadn't, and I think this conversation is really important for people, particularly school leaders, who maybe think there are things that were drilled into me, through my teacher training, and I was primary trained initially, and so having young children sat on the carpet, when I was down in the early stages, doing the register, going through and checking book bags and things like this that I reflect on as being ingrained in me from day one. Checking book bags for notes. Whereas I imagine for some people who trained during the pandemic times, this has not been ingrained in the same way. Maybe they were ingrained into Zoom calls and online learning and such like. Now, Joanne, how do you feel about your training and the bits that you could learn remotely, or could teaching criteria that you could learn remotely, and bits that maybe you really missed out on being in the classroom to do?
Um, I think I had the same experience as Michael with the mini whiteboards. Being taught to use them over Zoom without a mini whiteboard was very interesting. But the ones that really stick with me is behavior management, like how to have restorative conversations, how to talk some heightened students down from a dangerous situation. Because the school that I'm in, I love it. I love it to death. I don't want to work in schools that are too much different. But we have our challenges, and we have students with very high need. And going into that school as a trainee teacher, in which there are incidences of students being quite aggressive, and being a new face and having only spoken to people over Zoom for maybe the best part of a year in general in my life because of lockdowns, and then being faced with students who have this need and knowing what to say and knowing how to respond, that was really difficult. I'm trying to think what else. Oh yes, roam marking. It's really hard to explain to someone who's done online learning where you can click on a couple of buttons and immediately it pulls up the student's screen, what they're typing, what they've done. You can see exactly what you need to. You can quickly search through the Word document by words, like to see where they're at and to see if they've included key information. Whereas looking at a book with written work in it, at students' handwriting, and knowing what to look for and how to mark effectively, that was my steepest learning curve, I think, when it came to being in the classroom. Because how do you explain to someone how to do that without examples of student work and over a screen?
Yeah, the more you guys talk about it. Sorry, Michael, you were going to say something.
Yeah, can I just throw into that corridors as well? When you were talking about behavior management there, I just thought corridors when I trained, it was one direction, it was single file, it was staggered, it was ordered. Everyone had a sort of 5 minute overlap between lessons. And then I got to school where I'm teaching and the pips go and it's absolute carnage outside. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've never dealt with a corridor before. I've never dealt with a fight before. And sort of starting from scratch, I think that's probably become one of my strengths as a teacher, but it was all because it was brand new. And then maybe just a language specific one as well. We do a lot of pronunciation. How do you form the phonics of the French language? It's very different to English. You have to watch each other's mouths, and I'll need to watch their mouths. That's really difficult with face masks. So it's some things I very happily have gone. No face masks is much easier.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think there's another thing there, and maybe when we pull through a bit, I've not seen it subject specific broken down about that support and the lag of how, because I imagine there are some subjects like art, like languages, as you mentioned in that case, where there will have been a bigger impact. I imagine, and this might be my, my poor knowledge of teaching maths maybe at secondary level, but I imagine maths was probably, I feel like that was a bit easier to translate to remote learning. Something like music, something like art, and the example you gave of languages there, I think there will have been bits that subject specific became a lot harder. Now, I just want to say that we are brought to you tonight by EDAPT. Teaching is a rewarding profession, but it comes with its fair share of challenges.
Teaching is a rewarding profession, but it comes with its fair share of challenges. That's where EDAPT come in. We're not your typical trade union, but instead a modern, apolitical alternative, offering expert legal, employment and mental health support. Protection without the politics. So what makes EDAPT different? We're always apolitical and independent, specialised solely in supporting individual teachers. Our caseworkers are professionally qualified, ensuring you always get the best advice. Plus, there's 24/7 mental health support. Whether it's a simple contract check or handling serious allegations, EDAPT are here for you. Join the thousands of educators who've chosen EDAPT to protect their careers. Subscribe at edapt.org.uk today. EDAPT. Supporting school staff. Protecting careers.
Moving back to our conversation, I think I wanted for us to look at a specific piece of research. Really, it comes from the Policy Institute and King's College London. Its title is Understanding and Mitigating the Impact of COVID-19 Disruption on Trainee and Early Career Teachers in Secondary Schools. So we're focusing mainly here on secondary schools as they were, but we're going to try and translate this broadly to the rest of the profession as well. And I'm hoping we can run through and just talk about some of these sort of key findings and the positives and negatives. Now, but before we do, I'd like to think, and we'll start with Joanne here. Do you think, we can compare to me. I'm very honest about the things I'm good at and I'm bad at. My training, though, was by all accounts average and pre-pandemic and boring. And I just did a general PGCE, where I was in class, I was in free placements. I did some time in uni lectures with loads of other people around me, some courses. I maybe learned a bit of PowerPoint, how to use an interactive whiteboard. Nothing too modern. I'm afraid it was a while ago. But it didn't prepare me for modern teaching, certainly not this pandemic. So, Joanne, was there things that happened through your training that you think set you up better than what I got, and some things where you weren't set up as well?
Oh, now you've asked me. I'll be honest, I feel pretty skeptical of Teach First teacher training. I think that it was really great in building resilience, and that's been really useful for me in a tough behavioral school setting which I'm in. But I'll be honest, the training that I received, I don't know whether it was just because we were doing or training on top of full-time teaching and the cognitive overload that comes with that, but I feel like I learned the majority of the stuff from my school, my mentors, the people around me, other teachers in my school than I ever did through my training provider. And actually, when I was writing my coursework pieces for my PGDE, I actually wrote that. And they liked it enough that they give me a distinction for it. But I really do think that the training that we received, because it was so new, the situation of having to teach people to teach online while people are still trying to figure out how to teach online themselves, it was experimental. And I think the training that I received it really did reflect that. I learned a lot theoretically about pedagogy. And I have to say, on the philosophical side of things, I learned a lot about teaching, but I can't say that I actually ever remember anything taught to me through Teach First. But I can confidently say that my mentor has taught me lots that I still use today, and my colleagues lots that I still use today, and really value their advice and their wisdom.
No, I find that so interesting as a thing, because my initial sort of response to thinking of things that people could have done would be that, you guys would have been hammered on theory much more than I was. I was in the classroom and I was learning, and teaching was a practical thing that I learned from my school-based mentors, and through doing. And I kind of thought, at least they'll get more theory than I got. At least they'll get more pedagogical content and kind of research and all of those things. Well, let's hear Michael's experience then, and see if there's any sort of similarities or difference. Michael, do you think then through your training, you suggested that maybe behaviour management, the two of you have talked a bit, maybe that was weaker. You came out weaker than the average possibly then. Were there things you came out stronger or weaker than you think because of lockdown?
In terms of behaviour management, I think I probably did come out weaker. That's what I was told in my first job interview. So that's probably a very fair comment there. No, I think the same as Joanne just said. I just learned so much from my first mentor, and teaching is a practical thing. You can't learn everything theoretically, and you have to be in the school and teaching. And my first mentor, as I've said probably 3 times already, was incredible and taught more than I ever learned in that first year. If I could answer when you say, were there some benefits, where do I think I actually came out maybe better? The school I was in, I was just able to say yes to everything. So I could do an extracurricular. I took on a table tennis club. I can't play table tennis, but they just needed people. Everything was so spread out, where a PE teacher would have supervised 3 clubs at once, or sort of 3 sets of students at once. They couldn't do that. So I got to do extra things like that, extra lunch duties. They had extra staff on those lunch duties to manage queues. So there were a couple of things that I threw myself into as well. Started doing a few German lessons as well in my first placement school, which took me a long way back to my German A level. And I think just the fact that I tried a lot of things was really good. Perhaps as well, on the theory side, I did a lot of research into teaching language to children with ASD. And I think I just had more time to spend on that because I wasn't in school, and I did have, unfortunately, I got pinged and I had 2 weeks off of being in school. So I just had that time to really invest in that essay. So yeah, perhaps to support your theory that I got more time in there. It's not that I had more time for the theoretical, but actually I had more time to devote myself to actually.
It's really interesting there that you talk, because I completely overlooked how short-staffed and how we were kind of putting our hats and doing everything. And certainly, maybe there wasn't so much of lost opportunities. Maybe people experienced what you experienced, and it because we were short, people were asked to turn their hand to a lot of different things, or maybe it opened up these opportunities to do different things. Now, I'm going to go through, as I say, that this understanding and mitigating the impact of COVID-19 disruption on trainee teachers and early career teachers. from the Policy Institute in King's College London. Now, the first one, what I'll do is there's some key findings that we go through, and I think we have 12 key findings here. What I want to do is I want to sort of read out the key finding, throw it out to you, and see if actually this reflects. You're kind of my test group here. They say this is what's happened. Oh, we're going to reflect it with some real teachers who went through it. So this is the first of the findings that they believe from their research. This is what you should have found. So their key finding, number one, was ECTs have reported some positive impacts of training during the pandemic, such as use of IT to support teaching and learning, heightened sense of professional community, and staff also noted resilience of trainees and ECTs during the period. Now, we've already mentioned a little bit about IT. We've already mentioned a little bit about resilience. The bit I want to focus on there, just for a second, but you feel free to talk around the whole point there, is, Joanne, a heightened sense of professional community. Is that something you noticed?
To an extent, within the trainee network that I was in, yes. My community was especially essential for me because I moved somewhere where I didn't know anywhere. One, had no family, had no friends there. So yes, I very quickly formed a very strong community of, or found myself part of a very strong and supportive community of teachers at all different stages. Teachers who had trained with Teach First, with ATT, which is an ARC teacher training program, people that were in my year, the year above, and then in my second year of teaching, the year below. And I certainly found that. But I have to say, in my school context, people have reported, I mean, now I'm union rep, so I hear these things. There's actually less of a sense of community within the school because people had got used to bubbling and being just in their classroom, and people have steered away from being in the staff room and helping each other plan and co-planning with different departments and going about and giving each other a hand with various different things and exchanging seating plans. People don't do that anymore. And so there is sort of a loss, which is reflective of, I mean, look around us, how much less social are people in general as a result of the pandemic. There's a bunch of us, and I have to say myself included for a little bit, who became quite agoraphobic. And I think, among trainees, there's certainly a strong community. Among teachers, I wouldn't say that there really is. I've kind of thrown myself into, different communities in Facebook groups and LinkedIn, that sort of thing, to get to know other teachers. But I know that in person, I certainly haven't found that to be the case.
And Michael, you might be maybe a different perspective on this, because obviously, like myself, I'm from a teaching family. Unfortunately, both parents and my sister, all teachers. Did you get a sense that the community of teachers was pulling together or fragmenting?
There's a very good question. I don't know. I feel like at the beginning of the training, I'm very sorry, it's dog feeding time, so you're going to hear
That's
some
okay.
whimpers in the background. You might hear some loud barks from the other one. At the beginning, it was that I remember the staff in my first school, which was really super strict on all the rules. Every second and third seat in the staff room had this black and yellow tape over it. So when you went down to the staff room, there was no one there. You just couldn't fit more than about 20 staff in this huge staff room. And it was a school where it was a very nice school and lots of facilities, lots of offices. So teachers really were shut away and had their own classrooms. So you didn't really see them. Second school I was in, then it was a tiny staff room in an old nunnery, so everyone just kind of kept away and just went outside and things. And so I don't really feel like I met many teachers while I was training. Moving into my actual job, I guess I feel more of that connection. But is that just after sort of 2-3 years of having so little adult company? I've just felt happy to be around actual adults again. I don't know if it's hard for me to compare this to pre-pandemic. I don't know if they were closer then, But certainly during that training time, I found it was quite difficult to connect with other more experienced teachers, and the people who would brave the take just staff rooms would really be us EC or BTs, as you were, who hadn't yet got a classroom.
No, thank you for reflecting on that. And one of the other parts within this comment, which we have mentioned a little bit about the resilience of trainees, and I really, and this is from a personal point of view, dislike the idea that you have to go through something hard to make you resilient, or to this kind of trial by fire idea. At the start of my career, back when it was NQTs, and I went through that, there still very much was this idea that you had to struggle because you had to learn, because teaching was hard and all of those things. And I want to, they talk about this resilience here, but I want to throw in a quote from Education Support, the mental health support for teachers, which, looking at a 2021 teacher wellbeing index, they found that early careers teachers at the time struggled with panic attacks, changes to appetite, tearfulness, mood swings. 3/4 of teachers, 74%, thought that their initial teacher training course did not prepare them to manage their own well-being. I guess my question is, do you think it made you resilient, or were you just one of the lucky ones? Because Schools Week this week, they've said, the numbers are out now. 3,000 trainees didn't make it. I guess, in that sense, we should have found someone who maybe didn't make it to reflect, and it was twice as many as the pre-pandemic numbers. I guess. I guess my question is, to Joanne, was it being hard a good thing, or, were you just the lucky ones who survived it?
I'm really glad you asked that, just because I had a lot of friends in my community in Hastings. Over half of them left my first year, and I'm one of the few of my cohort left teaching in my third now. Like, I'm one of maybe four, and it was a large cohort of teachers. We're talking like 20 teachers in my year started in my area teaching. I would say that I was and wasn't one of the lucky ones. Teaching during the pandemic broke me and formed me in its own image. I really wasn't prepared for the well-being aspect of it. I wasn't prepared for the loneliness of it. Teaching, nobody can prepare you for the workload of teaching. No one can prepare you for the thanklessness of it sometimes, in the highs and the lows. And when you're going into that straight from university, straight from virtual, and all of a sudden you're faced with all this, and there's a lot of change. I definitely struggled. And I'll be fully honest. I was signed off at the end of my first year, and I'm glad that I did, because if I didn't get signed off for the last 2 weeks of term, I don't know if I would have been well enough to continue teaching my second. It's a bit like what Mike was saying, or Michael, sorry, love, was saying earlier, about how you kind of pick up lots of different things because there's so much need, there's so much opportunity, but more than opportunity, there is need. And it's because you're juggling so many things as well as training, because people need you everywhere. And there was not enough staff, and the workload was insane. What was being expected of us was insane. And I was not prepared at all for the mental toll that any of that would take, and the mental toll of pandemic as well on top of it. I don't know if I'd blame teacher training as much as I would just a mixture of a pandemic, a change, a very stressful, very high workload job all together just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I'm thankful for it. I think it was a great opportunity, and it's developed me a lot as a person. I wouldn't be who I am today had I not gone through it, and lots of positive things have happened in my life as a result of it. But it is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I think it's probably the most tough and harrowing experience I've ever been through in my life was my teacher training.
Now, Joanne, because that's such a powerful reflection that you've shared with us there, and I want to ask, do you think that that changes. You say you a union rep now, and likely both of you go on to be middle leaders, have trainees of your own, supporting people coming through. Do you think that experience will change how you see the need to support new teachers, newer than you teachers coming up?
That's certainly what I found. That's what drove me actually to become qualified as a mental health first aider in the first instance in my school. It's also what's making me at the minute push for more SEND and SEMH training for myself, not just to help me support other members of staff more effectively, because I know that, to be quite honest with you, and if we were being brutally honest, the mental health resources in place for teachers are crap. They really are. Like, they are bog standard, and they are not good enough for the need of the teachers, and for what actually can happen, the extremes of teaching. Yeah, for sure. It's definitely influenced me. It's made me realize the importance of the pastoral role that I have, not just with other students, but with other trainees. And I really do hope in the next couple of years to take on trainees of my own and to help support them, because I am so thankful for the people that were there for me. And I will forever be grateful to those more experienced members of staff that really were a shoulder to cry on, and a real support when I was training. And yeah, that is why I took on the union rep role. I kind of wanted to give that back, because I've taken so much help from other colleagues in my first 2 years. I just wanted to be able to give it back.
And Michael, do you think your experiences of training and through that period have changed or impact on, maybe, because we can never know how we would have been had it not happened? Do you think that they still impact on how you treat, when you see a student teacher coming through, or a trainee maybe coming in? Do you think it impacts on how you think of them and how you relate to them?
Sorry, lost the mute button. Yeah, firstly, I think it's brilliant. You asked me Michael, and I said Mike, and you both keep apologising for calling me Mike, which is amazing.
I know. Do you know
Don't
what?
worry
Like, it's what it is your username on the thing that I keep reading, and I go to say Mike, and then I look at your username and it says Michael, and I go, "Oh, panic! Right, I'm
Oh,
going to
does it?
switch back to the other one." And then,
Oh, fair
yeah,
enough.
terrible. Right, I'm gonna make a conscious effort now. Mike.
Do you know what?
Mike.
They're both my name, so I'm not that bothered. It's fine, don't worry. Yeah, so it's, as I said, although I'm just out of ECT, I'm now 2IC, and I'm kind of in that bizarre position where I'm, as we've had new staff come in, we've got newer staff to the department, and yeah, I'm early on in my career. So although I'm not an experienced teacher, I'm one of the more experienced within the school, and we had our Ofsted, and so a lot of staff moved after that. So I'm kind of that position of, I'm not particularly experienced, and yet I feel in some ways like one of the more experienced people within the school. And it definitely, I definitely think of the teachers coming in at the moment. What's the support I needed when I came in new to the school, and what are the things that I've had to go through? Like I said in those initial meetings, I had to go through what's the point of circulating? Why do we circulate? Think about behaviour management. You know, again, with that circulating, like, what's your position in the classroom was a big thing for me that might really come naturally to other teachers, and it's yeah, something that I've kind of came alongside some of those new teachers just to really make sure that they were hearing the things that I'd needed to hear when I started the training, that for those more experienced mentors perhaps was second nature and they didn't think of saying. It's been really encouraging actually this year, at the start of the year, to hear a lot of those meetings and whole school training sessions, to hear people saying things like, and we know that this is the best place to be in a classroom, and in this moment I'm doing this in the classroom. And I'm not saying that's me personally who's pushed that through, but clearly enough conversations have been had around the school to say actually there are some things that new trainees coming in may not have taught because of may not have experienced because of the time they trained. So yeah, I'm definitely more conscious of what they have and haven't experienced, and how I come along.
Well, beautifully segueing me on to the next key finding, which we'll move on to, which is
Purely
number
intentional.
2 in the key findings. You've done me a massive favour there, because it segues us to key finding number 2, which was for ECTs. There's a disconnect between the need for personalised support in response to their varied training experience and prescribed content of induction programs. So we're talking here about, for ECT year 1 and year 2, and some of those changes that have happened. I should say here in Wales, we are still at 1 year NQTs, and so it's a different experience again for some people. But I guess, Joanne, when you started that part of your career, post qualification into your early career stages, still, getting support and training, was there a question and understanding that some people, or that yourself maybe, would have gaps or things that you hadn't experienced? Was it personalised enough, do you think?
I'll have to say no, not really. I did my ECT1 with ARC's Ambition Institute because I'm at an ARC school, and I did my ECT1 along with other ARC trainees who were ECT1. But they got their QTS through a traditional PGCE route or through ARC, and they had a much lighter timetable than I did. And I know that it's unusual with Teach First, learning to teach as you qualify. But by the time I was ECT1, I had a full year of full-time teaching underneath my belt already. So when I got into ECT1 and it was going over stuff like entrance routines and the importance of, behavior management, and a lot of the stuff for me was repeating what I'd learned 3 months into my first year of teaching of my year where I was unqualified, and so I really and I've spoken to other ECTs about this. They really found their ECT years kind of pointless. I definitely found it useful, the observations that I had in order to pass ECT 1, and I found them useful because being reflective and getting feedback on your teaching is always helpful, for your practice as a teacher. But I didn't learn anything from my ECT1 that I didn't already know. So fingers crossed ECT2 is a bit better. But I certainly didn't find that it was a very good.
Well, I do wonder that. I think the ECT framework, there's a whole nother topic and show on whether or not that will work, and whether we're gonna see some changes to that soon, potentially. There've been some news articles coming out.
Teaching is a rewarding profession, but it comes with its fair share of challenges. That's where ADAPT come in. We're not your typical trade union, but instead a modern, apolitical alternative, offering expert legal, employment and mental health support. Protection without the politics. So what makes ADAPT different? We're always apolitical and independent, specialised solely in supporting individual teachers. Our caseworkers are professionally qualified, ensuring you always get the best advice. Plus, there's 24/7 mental health support. Whether it's a simple contract check or handling serious allegations, ADAPT are here for you. Join the thousands of educators who've chosen ADAPT to protect their careers. Subscribe at adapt.org.uk today. ADAPT. Supporting school staff. Protecting careers.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
RAC remains the top education story across many media outlets, with the BBC focusing on the impact the issue is having on universities across the UK. The news website refers to closures of lecture theatres, science labs and student unions. So far, 14 universities have told the BBC that they have closed or partially closed areas containing the reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete. Some lectures have had to be relocated, and a small number of universities have had to find alternative accommodation for students, as halls of residence have also been affected. This has placed additional pressures on universities already facing housing shortages, with charity Unipol suggesting that student housing shortages are going to get worse in some cities. Student numbers are growing, but the number of new rooms is tumbling. This is largely due to high building costs, older buildings falling into disrepair, and now RAC concerns are adding to the issue. Last week, the DfE published the list of 147 schools in England built using the concrete. 6 unions have now written to Education Secretary Gillian Keegan asking a series of urgent questions. The BBC says that Essex is the county in England with the most affected schools, with 25 closed, partly closed, or making alternative arrangements. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has dismissed suggestions that he was at fault for the concrete crisis. During Prime Minister's question time, he said his government had acted decisively, whilst opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer referred to him as Captain Hindsight. In Wales, only 2 schools have so far been affected by RAC, but First Minister Mark Drakeford said inspections were ongoing. In Scotland, Humza Yousaf has outlined his plans for the coming year, with a heavy focus on expanding childcare provision, saying it is the best way to support families. This plan includes the recruitment of 1,000 more childminders by 2026. Free childcare hours are being extended to 2-year-olds across the country. There will be a pilot of expanded care from 9 months to the end of primary in 6 local authority areas, and free school meals for P6 and P7 pupils moves forward. But those in receipt of the Scottish Child Payment will receive them first by 2024, with others following by 2026. Last week, Mr Yousaf also commented on the issue of banning single-use vapes, and linked this to the comments made about young people using vapes too often. He stated that the government will consult on curbing the sale of disposable single-use vapes, including consulting on an outright ban. According to The Guardian, South Korean teachers have staged walkouts over harassment by parents and students. Thousands of staff attended a rally in Seoul demanding better protection after a number of teacher suicides. Teachers are being increasingly vocal about their experiences of maltreatment, including being accused of child abuse after disciplining students. Around 15,000 teachers attended a rally last week, and some schools had to temporarily close due to a lack of staff. As of June 2023, 100 school teachers had died by suicide in the country since 2018. The current Education Ministry blamed the current situation on previous governments, saying that they had overemphasised students' human rights over teachers' rights. Finally, The Guardian also reports that a city in Japan is tackling a rise in truancy with the help of robots. 2 schools in Kumamoto have purchased mechanical assistants to help children regain confidence in dealing with teachers and their peers. It is hoped the robots will encourage children to attend classes remotely and eventually coax them back in person. The robots will be equipped with microphones, speakers and cameras. Students learning remotely will be connected to the robots via laptops, allowing them to attend and take part in discussions. The robots will not be confined to classrooms, but be free to roam so pupils can take part in other events and enjoy social times remotely too. Japan, like many countries, including the UK, is facing a rise in the number of pupils refusing to go to school since the pandemic. Could robots be the key to improvement? This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week we've all returned to work and I'm going to discuss the old argument of digital or paper diary. For every argument for going digital, there's a counter argument for not, and vice versa. You can access a digital diary from anywhere, on any device, but if you don't have a signal, it's useless. A paper diary can't get hacked, but it can be picked up and read if left lying around. You get the point. I personally like a digital diary, as it suits the way I work. I can add links to online meetings, add notes and attach documents. I can see my day, week, month, year at the click of a button, and the most useful thing for me is I get reminder notifications. One thing to consider if moving digital this year is policies on phones in your school, as this is the most likely way you'll access it on the move. And probably most importantly, if you're using your phone, will you be able to resist the notifications from other apps or emails you see when you switch it on to use it? Cost doesn't really apply as a factor because you probably already have a phone capable of running a digital diary. But work-life balance may need to be considered as the diary is there 24/7. This can, however, be remedied by using Do Not Disturb settings for notifications. In the end, it's a personal choice. Are you paper or digital? Let us know at TT Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
But it came at a strange time as well. And Michael, what about yourself? The early career part, that ECT part, do you think that was tailored enough to your experiences training?
Yeah, it's nice, sort of, as me and Joanne have had very different experiences. We've kind of seen different sides of things up to this point in the conversation. 100% agreeing with everything you're saying there, Joanne. Yeah, I mean, for you being in the same school, I know that people who trained in our school in their BT year and then their ECT years found exactly that. Get off my floor. Sorry, guys, puppy. And
No, that's fine.
Let me grab a tutor. There we go. For me, it was joining a new school. So there was some merit in some of the things we were doing in that ECT year one. But I know that the ones who trained in their training year before that said they were literally repeating things. And I understand why in a pandemic they're saying teachers need extra support. And I get the idea behind the ECF is that to ease the recruitment crisis, there needs to be extra support for teachers. And I think everyone agrees that's the right thing. But is an extra year of Zoom lectures what anybody asked for? And, I think we complained enough as an ECT cohort that our school changed provider. So this current set of ECTs are doing a different system to what we were doing with a different university. And yeah, it all comes down to the very basic of teaching.
Mike, I think we've lost you there. You might have just hit the... Oh, are you back?
Yeah, sorry, someone just called me. I'll have to go in a for a second. This is the wardrobe guy I mentioned earlier. Sorry.
Not a problem at all.
It's all happening
Listen,
at once. No, I'll just finish that. Just say that we need that individual tailored support, and that's what we do as teachers. We give individual tailored support. So then to see the teacher training become Zoom lectures and then adding an extra year of that, it just does. There seems to be a disconnect, and I think I really want to believe that there's great training available, but sadly the best piece of hope I can give Joanne is that ECT 2 is a lot less taxing time-wise than ECT 1. So there's at least something positive. And I'll stay on here, but I've got a guy to see a wardrobe. So
no problem. Listen, Mike, yep, we will hear from you again, I'm sure, before the end of the show. But Joanne, we are going to together move on to the next part. And there's something really interesting. I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on this in Finding Free from the Policy Institute, Understanding and Mitigating the Impact of COVID-19 Disruption on Early Career Teachers. And this one is about that teacher training experience during COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in reduced opportunities for pastoral practice, limited parental engagement, and reduced involvement with extracurricular activities. Now, we've talked a little bit about the pastoral support, and I know Mike has mentioned some of the extracurricular activities from that point of view, but I wonder, I hadn't thought about parental engagement. I imagine there was opportunities to message them or have Zoom calls and things, but was it, well, I don't, you might not even have back in person parents' evenings yet, but what was it like for you then going back to meeting parents, I guess, face to face, or has that not even happened yet?
I'll be honest and say that I did make an effort to try and meet as many parents as I could in person in my first year. Anyway, specifically students that I thought were struggling either academically or with behavioural expectations, we could have in-person meetings. I mean, granted, it would be distanced with masks and in a ventilated room, but I did see as many as I could anyway in person, but I certainly found that even over the phone, parents were not engaging with the school. They really saw school as like a separate realm in which they no longer had to engage, I suppose, because for them it was that they had been teaching their child during the real height of the lockdown downs, where I wasn't a teacher yet at that stage. The lockdowns were sort of winding down by the time I started. And the engagement or trying to get a hold of parents in my first year was a trial. And I think the biggest thing I found when meeting parents is the time aspect of parents' evenings. I'd never really, because I could take a parents' evening from a laptop anywhere, whether that's in school, in the comfort of my living room, to seeing them in person in a hall, staying at school till late at night. And I didn't really experience what that was like until my second year of teaching. That was a unique experience. And I guess that was the weird change. But yeah, I didn't find meeting the parents in person too bad. I think actually it declawed a lot of parents for me, because I think it's very easy for people to be quite prickly over the phone or over email. But once you meet them in person, it can be a lot easier to work together to support the child. I mean, I don't want to sound negative there at all, but I certainly find that with the highest needs students, their parents maybe would be very skeptical over teachers' feedback if they were struggling over phone versus in person.
No, certainly. It sounds like we, maybe, have similar, sort of teaching demographics, I guess might be the best word. But and certainly, I would reflect on that as well. I think that the loss of the ability to sit down in a room with someone and talk to them on a that interpersonal level was something that massively affected what I did. And I should say for the listeners, if you're at my school, we still are having Zoom parents' evenings. We are not back to that massive where you lug down your books, you put your little name card on it, and all of these things that were so vividly part of teaching for me. That still isn't a thing where I teach anymore. It's more efficient, it's more effective, maybe, but there is something that you lose there. And it is interesting to think that actually, maybe there are some teachers, particularly as I say, if you taught at my school, trained there, or you have worked there since the pandemic, you will have not done a parents' evening in person at the school. It will not have been a thing. I want to move on to our fourth point of the findings here. Just some of these we will whiz through quickly because we've accidentally covered them in our talking already. But number 4 point was well-being of ECTs impacted by the pressures of the early career framework, exacerbated by varied training experiences. And we've kind of talked about Joanne's experience with that. And number 5 was schools have experienced time and resource limitations in providing mentoring for trainees and ECT induction simultaneously. Now, Joanne, you've talked very positively about school support and mentoring, and how you feel that has supported you. Mentoring for me when I was at NQT maybe didn't exist in the same form that it does now, with the same thought and the same, it's more maybe haphazard, more ad hoc. Do you feel that, the advice here, they say on mentoring, is that they should work closely together, providing adequate time and space and all of those things? Are you a fan of mentoring then for early careers teachers?
I don't really know how useful it is once you're qualified. I will say that. I think sometimes the hour every week is felt by both my mentor and by me. There would be a better use of time if we were co-planning or if we were cooperatively planning, because my mentor just happens to be my head of department. It would be better spent doing that and sort of sharing resources and building resources together than it would be, doing feedback on a lesson, because at the minute it's the same sort of feedback, which is largely positive, and there aren't that many areas for action anymore, as there are, well, with actually my teaching practice, as there is with my planning. And so having a mentor use that time in their timetable to go in and observe me, when it'd be better spent sitting down with the hour meeting and just planning with me, I think that would be much better use of their time. But that's just my own context.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is saying here, this personalization of it, this idea that we have all had different experiences, is something that I think has been a long time coming in education. A person, these one size fits all routes and expectations maybe aren't right, and maybe this is the time now, when people have had such various experiences, for us to say, actually, do you know what? Are we tailored enough? Now, I want to get on to the next point here, just quickly, because as I say, some of these are small. Some of them are big. And the next point from their findings was that the growth and retention of ECTs benefits from the provision of formal and informal support, including through collaboration with professionals and ECTs in different learning and social spaces. Now, one of the things that jumped out to me for this was, this idea of support, school to school support, cluster meetings, as we used to call them at one point, all of those things that used to happen, even teach meets and getting out to conferences, all of that stopped. All of that, disappeared or went online. And I was a massive fan of online, the plethora of online resources, things that happened and training that I was able to complete, and it was great. But there was a loss of connection for me. Now, I don't know, Joanne, do you feel your professional network, maybe that's the right word for it, suffered because you started teaching at the time of a lockdown or a pandemic?
Yeah, I definitely do. Everything from the moment I started was online. Because I'm an art, and at an art school, a lot of these big art meetings that would normally happen in London, allowing you to network with other art teachers and trainees, just didn't happen. I had my first and only in-person art conference in London last year, around the same time as sort of now that we're speaking. And it was brilliant, like being able to sit across from colleagues and actually look at their resources with them and exchange notes and join WhatsApp groups and add each other to different Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups that we're part of. It's really hard in the same way to network and socialize online. And I think, I particularly struggled with that as someone who's neurodivergent. In-person socializing is actually much easier. I mean, socializing as a whole as a neurodivergent person is a bit more tricky, but socializing in person and networking in person is a lot easier to make those connections, and make impressions and that sort of thing. So certainly found that. I definitely felt a lot.
Yeah, I think I was so pleased at the time with these free training events that were happening on Zoom, and I was so enamored by that, and I was so excited. And then it got to a point, I guess all of us had that kind of fatigue of not being able to go out, where I was missing not the training maybe, but the going to get a coffee at a training event. And this is the things, that used to happen. We used to be down at maybe the local Holiday Inn, and there'd be a little kind of breakfast bar of croissants or something like that, pastries. And actually some of those powerful conversations of meeting teachers from other schools or, other areas, that was so important to me in my formative years as a teacher, that were gone for some young teachers. And I really do think, I don't know, all credit to the teachers who came through it, I think, because it's done, we are still here and we still have a profession thanks to the new teachers coming in. I want to move on to a couple of these. I'm going to skip through them though, because some of this does come out critical of the ECT framework, and these next ones certainly do, I think, a little bit for me. Number 7 of their findings was opportunities for reflection are not linked to assessment. This is not a COVID issue for me. Number 8, ECTs found that engagement with research was empowering, but have been frustrated by induction material being repetitive of their training. Well, that's something that Joanne has mentioned for us already. But this next one, number 9 here, the experience of training during COVID-19 pandemic has reduced opportunities for ECTs to work with a diverse range of students. And, I guess maybe they're talking about their different sets when we were in bubbles. Maybe they're talking there about different placements in different types of schools. But Joanne, do you feel that you didn't get to work with the full range of students because of when you trained?
I definitely feel that's a possibility. I mean, from talking to, because really my only point of contact was in my first year. I lived with another trainee in my area who worked in a very, very different school context. In fact, she worked at the school where we often do our contrasting work experience. My school being the behaviourally challenging school, her school being the very behaviourally rigorous and academic Catholic school. And that was my only real reference for a different model of teaching, is hearing her talk about work and then thinking to myself, God, is she even doing the same job as me? But because we didn't really have the same opportunity to go in, observe, do placements early on in our career, my career, I didn't really get to teach a broad range of students. I mean, later on in my first year, I had a week where I did my contrasting school placement there. But, even speaking to other people in other schools, there's loads of experiences and different ways of teaching that I've never been exposed to, because when you are in a department in a large school which is bubbling all the time, you kind of get closed into your own context, and you don't really see outside of your school and the type of students that you're teaching. I know that in my first 2 years, mostly the students I was teaching as well were SEND students in the low bands, the low sets, who needed the most support in their learning to reach those passing grades. And I definitely found, as a result of the limitations of training during a pandemic, that when I was training, I didn't get the full experience of what it was like to teach. I mean, I hopefully I'm saying this now that I teach all sets. I've had many more experiences now following my first year of teaching, but I still feel the loss of it. That other teachers had this ability to sort of have placements in a couple different schools.
Yeah, it's and it is so, for me, it's so different to how I learned, and mine maybe was an informal training because I did my PGCE, then worked supply for a year or two, and then did my NQT year. But by the time I'd got through my NQT year, I'd maybe worked in or had placements in, if that's the right word, if you're including the teacher training and the supply work, maybe 20 to 30 different schools and contexts and year groups, and I found that so. I find that whether I'm right or wrong, I think experiencing different things is a really positive thing for new teachers to see how things are done differently. And I do wonder if that will be an ongoing legacy of COVID, is that we maybe have seen less of different contexts because of just how we are. As I say, I have visited. I visited a school last year that wasn't my school. The year before, I didn't go to another school. But the years before that, before the pandemic, I was going to, even as a static teacher, I was going to other schools just for a look around or to meet other senior leaders or to look around. And I don't know, do you get the opportunity now to go out and visit other schools, Joanne?
No, not really. And I think my cover supervisor would crucify me if I asked.
No, I wonder. It's one of those things. I think it's getting back that way. I think maybe people are still a bit staffed tightly and all of those things. But it used to be a thing. It was the thing that you would, be going out to each other's schools and having a look around and all of those things. Now, Mike's back with us. And Mike, we were just talking about, experience of other schools and getting out there, and whether one of the statements here is that maybe ECTs haven't had the opportunity to work with a diverse range of students in different settings. How do you feel about where you are at the moment? Did you have that opportunity so far to see how things could be done differently at other schools and with different students? Oh, I'm just going to check. Maybe Mike isn't back with us. I'm not sure. Maybe there's a connection problem there, but we'll save that question and maybe come back to it if we can just click in. We will see. But we are, rapidly getting through these. As I say, we're on to number 10 of 12, which means our timing's just about hitting right here, Joanne. You're keeping me on track. Sometimes I waffle. You're keeping me on track, and we're getting through these. But number 10 is that the experience of training during the COVID pandemic has served to broaden perspectives that has led to innovative practice. And so, I mean, it's a hard thing to judge. Are we more innovative now than we were? I'm just going to check if Mike is back with us. Mike, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I've heard you all along. How's that?
Oh, fantastic. No, that's wonderful. Good to have you back. Now, we were just talking about experience, and one of the statements earlier on, number 9, was about there was a lack of reduced opportunities for ECTs to work with a diverse range of students. Yeah. Is that something that reflects in your experience?
I mean, I don't know. I would say that I was possibly restricted by where I was training, in that I was training in the nice part of North Yorkshire. So perhaps the lack of diversity in the area I was training limited me more than the lack of opportunities I was given. But one of the things certainly I missed out on was the primary school visit, which I didn't do. So it has been a long number of years, 20 years since I've been in a primary school. So yeah, I would certainly say I lost out on that opportunity. I did get to work with different groups, high ability, low ability, and SEN, and different year groups. Sixth form as well was something I really pushed to make sure that I did get some involvement with. But for me, it's mainly the primary that I missed out.
No, I wonder, obviously, I think it's an incredible, for secondary school teachers to work in primary, I think equally primary school teachers need to be gaining some experience in secondary. Is it something that's ever been mentioned or brought up that you should, even by yourself, do you think that it's something you might get the chance to do? Does it feel like a deficit, or does it feel like you're missing the cherry on the cake? I guess I'm asking.
I think it's really important to understand where kids come in. So maybe language is in a really unique position in this, and I'm sure I'll have people screaming at their podcast, whatever it is, their phone or their radio or whatever, saying that that's not true in their subject too. But I'm trying to think of another subject where, like languages, you have to assume absolutely zero prior experience when you start in year 7. For example, PE. Children have done sport before. English and maths, of course, they've done it before. Art, they have done some art before. Perhaps maybe Joanne's thinking that would be her right now. How much RERS have they done before? But for me, it hadn't really come across as a question until we were very lucky to have the amazing Rachel Hawkes at our sort of federation-wide inset day. And it would have been really good to have seen some primary French or even another language to see what position these year 7s are coming in at, because for me it was a bit of a shock. They had never studied French before, and in 5 years' time they're expected to get a GCSE, and that's a lot. And it's even those who have done French before primary it's not often taught by subject specialists, and I'm correcting misconceptions.
Yeah, I should probably say that's me. I was probably doing that. I'm probably the scourge of secondary
Or
school
just
French teachers in
bon
the area I taught.
bonjour is
at.
hello, bon
Yeah,
après-midi. Don't bother about teaching bon après-midi. It doesn't exist. Don't need it.
I did my best, but someone has to cover PPA, and when it comes to PPA, that's a whole nother show when we talk about why people are giving PPA teachers the subjects that are hardest to teach, maybe. But yeah, I apologise. That probably was me teaching them the French all wrong.
Teaching is a rewarding profession, but it comes with its fair share of challenges. That's where ADAPT come in. We're not your typical trade union, but instead a modern, apolitical alternative, offering expert legal, employment and mental health support. Protection without the politics. So what makes ADAPT different? We're always apolitical and independent, specialised solely in supporting individual teachers. Our caseworkers are professionally qualified, ensuring you always get the best advice. Plus, there's 24/7 mental health support. Whether it's a simple contract check or handling serious allegations, ADAPT are here for you. Join the thousands of educators who've chosen ADAPT to protect their careers. Subscribe at adapt.org.uk today. ADAPT. Supporting school staff. Protecting careers.
We did, slightly move on, and then we took a step back to one of the other points here, which is number 10, and it does come up through a lot, is that the two of you are a generation of teachers who are more innovative now because of your experiences training, unlike the old caged teachers like myself, bound to our ways that things always were. Because you joined at a time where everything was in flux, you are allegedly, according to some of the research, more innovative and starting to do things differently. Joanne, do you feel like that? Does that describe you? Do you feel like you have been freed a little bit to be more innovative because of when you've joined teaching?
Not initially, no. I was kept on a very short leash for that reason, that I was trained differently. And so when I went into actual in-person teaching, it was a case of, you're going to teach the way that we tell you to teach, because this is the way that we know that it works. And for now, we don't want you messing with things before you know the basics. Now that I'm qualified and established at my school, yes, I have definitely found that. Like the fact that a lot of the teachers that have started in are bringing in new innovations in how to teach and how to plan and how to do assessment. Like using a lot more automatically assessed learning platforms like Seneca for regular assessments and tests and homeworks to reduce mark load, using AI to help us write lesson plans and MTPs that we then alter, coming up with new behavior systems which aren't so much based on the typical behaviorist sanction reward, and more based on mutual respect and strong relationships with the pupils, especially those pupils that really felt isolated as a result of the pandemic. Yes, I do think that training during the pandemic has made me and the other teachers in my cohort innovators, for sure.
And Michael, sorry, Mike. Oh, I keep doing it and reading off the
Fine,
screen. But it's going to be back and forth, back and forth. What about yourself? Do you feel that the generation of teachers coming through, because everything was up in the air and we were, the whole of the teaching profession was inventing it as we went along, has that become part of who you are as a teacher?
I wonder if it's okay to be super teacher and turn that back on you. Yeah,
by all means.
As a new teacher, yes, I like to think I've been innovative, and I taught maths my first term, and I've been able to take some of those things from maths, which worked brilliantly, to a very different different skill teaching subject in languages. So I think I have been able to be innovative, and I'm very supported by my department, and they allowed me to do that and went along with it. But I wonder, as a more experienced teacher, do you feel that you became more innovative over the pandemic as well?
Well, do you know what? I struggle to separate out whether it's a new teacher thing, that you just new teachers come into it with a passion and they bring new things. And there's a couple of our last points that we'll get onto that I think are really important for this. And you bring new things and you challenge the authority somewhat of let's try something different, and you bring that energy. So I struggle with the idea of, is that just a new passionate teacher thing, bringing something new to the profession, or is it because of the pandemic? Me personally, I'm far quicker to burn stuff and get rid of anything that isn't going to work. I'm far less tolerant of things, and I'm far more certainly far more open, I think, to some of the I don't want to say corner cutting, but there are some things we did because you did them. And an example I would give would be, going to a meeting. Now it's completely fine for people, like if there's a meeting, you had to be there in person. It's really normal now for people to just be like, oh yeah, I can't make it, but I'll be on Zoom, or I'll be on another platform. Sorry, that other video conferencing apps are available. That's really, really normal now, and all of those things. And so I think maybe we have just become a bit more open to trying something a little different, just because not doing something always because we always did it that way. And so, yeah, I do think there is a little more just in the profession generally. The reason I like talking to new teachers is because they always bring something which transfers us on, right? We're going to come back to point 11 in a minute. Point 12, though, was that they found about teachers who trained through COVID was the experience and skills gained from previous careers outside teaching proved beneficial to ECTs in the context of pandemic-related uncertainty and their ongoing professional development. And they said that greater recognition should be given to the role of transferable skills and experience than we'd thought before. And Joanne, do you think, is this a case now where actually we need to accept that people are bringing things with them? You're not a teacher at the start, a blank slate that we fill up. We need to recognize what you had before you became a teacher.
I definitely think so. I think my previous careers as a youth worker and as someone who did a lot of the tech stuff behind an interfaith organisation and a lot of the in-school stuff, that's shaped how I teach religious studies. It really, really has. And the kind of teacher that I am, sort of the affectionately known as soft teacher that manages to corral the toughest students, because I know how to actually go in and form relationships with people that don't share the same views as me, and I know how to adaptively use tech to do a range of different things. Like I definitely found that when I started teaching, I wasn't just a teacher. I was taking with me the experience that I had from my other roles, which formed me into the teacher that I became, that I am. And I do think there is something to be said of that. Like I know that my colleague, one of my previous colleagues, John Gibson, he actually worked in a call center before teaching and was very tech based. And the tech based innovations that he had come up with to save staff workload in the school were just fantastic. He also trained during the pandemic. I don't know if I mentioned that, probably did. It's a Thursday. But yeah, no, I do think that your previous careers do have an impact on the kind of teacher you become, especially post-COVID, when your training wasn't so much training as it was the suggestion that here you go, try and teach.
Yeah. Mike, what about yourself? Do you think, that we need to recognise the transferable skills that you brought with you into teaching, and that maybe at the start that wasn't something that was being recognised?
I mean, I certainly think that for me, I've been recognise in the role I am at the moment, as because of the career I've had in insurance, for us it's really a case of we need to create a spreadsheet to track all the data from whatever. Mike, can you create a spreadsheet? I'm happy to do that. It takes me 10 seconds and it will be far more complex than anyone else in the department wants, and then I have to simplify it so that they can use it. But that's fine. I can make these spreadsheets do different things. With the new GCSE, I started to analyse vocabulary occurrence within our curriculum and stuff, and I just spent a day over my half term just having fun with spreadsheets. So yeah, there's skills that we bring from previous careers. I think during my training year that wasn't really acknowledged at all, and I came in sort of as a beginner teacher, and I was sort of thought of as a beginner teacher, despite the fact I'm 5 years older than my mentor and have experience living across the world doing a variety of different things, and it's in this school where I am now where people have seen that and not just seen me as a beginner teacher, but someone who's had a career and been successful as other things. That's really fed into the way that I've developed and been trusted to do certain things, because they know I'm going to be able to pull through on that. So yeah, we have to understand that when I think the more you trust people and what they've done in previous careers, the better you get.
Yeah, I think that's something that I definitely take away from this report, is that, maybe there was a time where we didn't recognise that. And I guess maybe with the increase, if we are ever to get back to recruiting a lot more teachers, we need to start recognising those things. But I wanted to save time for point 11 on this, which is a really, again, a hard one to judge, because who are we comparing to? But they suggest from the findings that due to training through a pandemic, the experience of training during COVID-19 pandemic was positive in terms of social justice and equity, with a collective spirit emerging across teaching staff, irrespective of position and years of service. A couple of things kind of slammed together in that one, it feels, but social justice and equity, those things that come through. Joanne, do you think what you experienced in the pandemic, or what you saw as a teacher sort of training during the pandemic, has changed your attitude towards topics such as equity and social justice?
I mean, I'm glad you asked. As an RS teacher, I feel quite passionately about those subjects anyway, but certainly following COVID, yes, absolutely. I've definitely felt, radicalized is not the right word, but certainly stronger in my opinions and the view on how state school students have been massively disadvantaged by the pandemic, and it really shows the gap in provision between state school students, my working class students who are from one of the most deprived areas in the UK, versus students who come from much more privilege. And certainly I felt much more passionately, and really that passion has went into my career of really, seeing students coming into school and over the pandemic, they might not have had a book in the entire house, or their parents can't read, or they didn't have access to a laptop, and they genuinely had no learning. They have lost out in 2 years of learning, and they've landed in my classroom. And I have to not just be an RS teacher, but a basic literature teacher, and kind of a maths teacher as well, to try and catch them up to where they would normally be. And I definitely feel like that experience of seeing how it's affected kids, not just me, but the students, the way that it's impacted them emotionally and in terms of their education, how far it set them back. I've definitely felt a lot stronger in my opinions about social justice and equity, because I think the pandemic has shown once and for all it does not exist between working class students and private school students in this country. And we really do need to be doing a lot more to help with the teacher retention crisis and with recruitment of teachers, to really do anything to plug that gap.
And when I think back, and again, it seems, as you said earlier, it seems like 100 years ago, but I was taking food parcels out, boxing up food for people who were struggling, and I don't know. Whether that changed for us as a profession, whether it changed because of the new teachers coming through. But Michael, what are your thoughts on that aspect of the pandemic and as it lingers on?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I trained in a really nice, leafy, suburby, beautiful part of North Yorkshire, incredibly privileged. And I remember one of the things that I heard just was a throwaway comment that I didn't think about until I ended up in Southeast London facing kids who had lost all the value in education and didn't see why should they be doing it. Who were we to come onto their estate after 2 years of not being there? And well, this teacher said up in North Yorkshire, there's really, we've done everything we can during the pandemic. We've made everything online. There's no excuse. And I was talking my first week in this new school, and our home liaison officer said, mum's got 6 children and 1 device, so they get to log on to 1 lesson each a day if mum's got enough data. And it's really seeing that stark difference in the education between 2 state schools and 2 very average schools for that area has just made me think all the more that we need to make sure we're teaching the best that we can. And I do feel like I was probably quite a strong advocate and quite a strong interest in social justice, but perhaps more than anything, it's confronted me as someone who's middle class and grew up with, as you'd expect, 2 teacher parents with a high value in education. That is not everyone's experience, and that there are children who deserve a great education who don't care for one, and it's made me even stronger that I'm going to get them that education whether they want it.
As I say, such a powerful time, and something that certainly I think has affected a lot of teachers deep down. Really, there's a change there in what they saw and what affected them. Now, I want to swing, because we are rapidly reaching the end of our show. If you do want to hear more and you're listening live, you can of course head over to Twitter or X Spaces, where Education Tonight will be starting with Brent Poland and Adam Spence very shortly over there, 7:30. But I wanted just to kind of top up with this idea. We now are designing teacher training for post-pandemic world, and there should be things possibly that we keep from the pandemic period and things that we don't. But if I go to each of you in turn, and we'll start with Joanne, what would be one thing that you think actually I would keep this from pandemic training, and what would be one thing that you would hope never again should we try this?
I'll be honest, scrap the lot. Scrap the lot, start from scratch, burn the rest. And I do think I really would like to see in the future post-pandemic teaching is teaching new teacher trainees how to manage their workload, how to manage their well-being, how to do this effectively using new tools like AI, and how to use technology and different software and different platforms to help them with the workload of teaching, because that is going to be the biggest hurdle to them, and has been to many of my colleagues in their first year of teaching, that they weren't prepared.
Brilliant answer, but it does put Michael on the spot, because you're going to have to come up with something good. There must have been. Can we find something good that came out of COVID pandemic teacher training that we might just keep that one little thing?
Are you ready for a long, interesting bit of radio silence while I think? What was great about training? Sometimes the things that are great are the things that you missed, and that's, we'd say that we missed a lot. And actually, when you were talking earlier about being really quick to rip things up and start again, actually there are things about some traditional training that's really important. Like I said, I missed out on being in primary. I would love to have done that. Joanne, if I can slightly read into what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong. You didn't get your 2 contrasting placements properly, and actually there's a huge benefit in that. I went to 2 very different schools within a similar context, but saw enough difference that I knew when I was applying for jobs what kind of school I was looking for. So maybe it's not the changes that we made during the pandemic, but there are a couple of things that really did work. And perhaps we moved to a sort of new ECF and everything, the emphasis on mentors, which I know what you're saying earlier, but I think mentors are really important. But perhaps the next thing to consider is what is the workload on a mentor? If you're already short-staffed, how are mentors getting their protected time on their timetable? So are we considering mentor workload?
Fantastic, and two great answers. Now, thank you both so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your honesty, your passion. It's been a really interesting and I think a lot for listeners wherever they are in their career, but hopefully some senior leaders to take away from it about where we are going as a profession and how we support our young people. It is time for us to say goodnight from here in South Wales. I do say Nos da, which is Welsh for good night. So thank you, Joanne, for coming on, and Nos da.
Nos da, thank you so much for having me.
And Michael as well. Good night. Absolute pleasure. And the dogs. Great to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr and nos da to you. Language teacher, couldn't help it.
Oh, of course. Yes. Well, Diane, well done. So good night to listeners from me here in Swansea, in South Wales. We will see you next time on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in, talk it out.
Live from Swansea, this is the Twilight Show with Nathan Gynn on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.